important book, the author of The Persuaders at the Front Lines of the Fight for Hearts, Minds, and Democracy, Anand Giridharadas. Now, come on, that's not so bad for an Italian from Long Island, the pronunciation, right?
You should just make like an Italian version of the name. That's what happens when I go to Europe. What's amazing is they just make their own version of the name in every country, and it's great.
All right. Well, how would you pronounce the name? Go ahead.
Anand Giridharadas.
Giridharadas. All right. I'm getting closer. Okay. But I got to tell you,
my Italian name is Andy Ghirardelli.
All right. I like that. You see that? See, you would have hung out with me. Okay. I would have thought you were founder of the chocolate company if you had said that about yourself.
I can get you amazing discount.
I want to hold up the book for a second. Okay. And, you and I go back a long ways. The book is brilliant. Okay. I read it over the weekend, and I'm gonna tell you something I said, and I want you to react to it. I turned to my wife and I said, Anand has once again written a great book. There's scintillating truth in this book about what is actually going on in America, but not just America. We're going to talk about this because I think it's going on in the UK, France, other Western democracies. And yet it's so truthful that I think there's too much pain in it for people to really listen. What am I getting wrong about that?
I think that's probably true, whether that serves me or not. And I think it is what I think of the function as a writer to be. I think one of the reasons societies keep writers around, or should keep writers around, is that writers are, people who maybe are a little bit unaffiliated, when, most people have jobs or work for big organizations or part of political parties or companies. As you know, as someone who's been part of many companies, you sign a lot of paperwork saying you can't entirely say what you think. You've probably broken a lot of those contracts in your own life.
Well, that's the reason why I got fired. General Kelly told me, you didn't get fired for the comment about Steve Bannon. You got fired because you were telling the truth. It was uncomfortable for people. They didn't want to hear it. But
I think it just seems to me that that's the job of the writer. The writer is, I think Tom Wolfe said, the kind of the village gossip who says publicly the things that everyone is whispering to them but can't say because of the positions that those people have. And I think this book is no exception. I think there were a lot of truths. These are not my truths from the depths of my soul. These are reported truths that I was hearing from a lot of people in the fight for democracy, in different phases of the fight for democracy right now, because we are in an existential fight for democracy. And a lot of the people in that fight who I talked to had this concern that the pro-democracy cause, although it's fighting a righteous fight, isn't really as interested as it should be in bringing people in being bigger tomorrow than it is today. And that has to change.
Is this a white person's problem? And just hear me out for a second, okay? The whites were in charge, let's call it 1776 to today, but brown and black people are now going to be in the majority as it relates to the demography. So if the whites are in charge, no problem. Let's have the rules of democracy. Oh, wait a minute. Black and brown people could be in charge, so let's change the rules. What do I got wrong about that?
There's no question that if you had to pick like one fundamental force in American public life today, and it's, of course, there's a lot of things going on, but if you had to pick one, I think you'd say this was a country founded, with, on paper, some very sweeping ideals for all mankind. But in practice, as you know, they only really applied to propertied white men at the beginning, and then the property requirement was relaxed, and then the male requirement was relaxed, and only in the 20th century was the kind of requirement around whiteness relaxed. And it is absolutely the case that as this country has opened up its meaning and institutions and rights to more and more people, a shrinking minority of white Americans, and to be clear, it's not all white Americans by any means, a shrinking minority of white Americans has concluded that they would rather break the republic than share it. That's the choice, right? We can share it or we can break it. And I think we're not unique in this experience around the world, as you were talking about. It is easier to share resources and and believe in a democracy when everybody looks the same, right? I mean, we talk about Sweden and Norway, and they're having all these great safety nets. Well, if you've ever been to those countries, it's easy to look around and say, these are people I'm willing to share with. These are people I'm willing to be in a safety net with. We are trying to do something in this country that is quite different. With all due respect to Sweden and Norway, with all due respect to France and Germany, with all due respect to India and China, none of those countries are actually on the path we are to creating a truly plural country made of the world, forged of the world, people from every kind of background. And I sometimes think those of us who want to live in that world, who want to live in a future of continued expanded liberal democracy, multiracial democracy, we don't do enough of a good job of reminding ourselves that we're trying to do a really hard thing, a thing that maybe has not quite been proven out in the world. And so this revolt against the future, which is what I regard the kind of Trumpist, increasingly fascist movement as being, this revolt against the future, in some ways is a natural movement of resistance to progress that is happening. And I wrote the book because I want the forces of progress to get their shit together and figure out how to not just warn about the far right extremists, not just complain about them, not just be outraged by them, not just be reacting to them all the time and pointing at them, but actually to outcompete them, to build a movement that is bigger, better, feistier, more fiery, more magnanimous, more merciful, and more effective.
Well, I got something out of the book, all of that, but I also got a little bit of a restatement of the founding fathers out of this book in a weird way. Let me test this on you, because this is what I heard in your book, that they got it right, but they were too exclusionary. And so we've had all this amendments and all this social progress to make it more inclusionary. And now it's probably time to restate the ideals of what a republic is and self-government is, and recognize that if we become less tribal, less black and white, brown versus black, black versus white, white versus brown, etc., and we become more inclusive, the diversity of those ideas and the ability to learn from each other's life experiences would just lead to a better quality of life for all of us. Is that what I'm getting from your book, or no?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, not to make this about some places versus other places, but like you and I live in New York City, right? So you and I already live in this world, right? If you're living in much of California, you're already living in this world. Actually, in a lot of places in this country, you're living in this world, right? When you and I step outside in New York City, you are hearing languages from all over. You are encountering people. You work with people. I work with people who represent the most intelligent, passionate, committed, creative people from around the world, kind of cherry-picked by the United States to come here and invest their talents and dreams here, build their families here. You and I live in that world, and I don't think we would have it any other way, right? I don't think you, whether you're white like you or brown like me, I don't think I would go, or you would go, trade it to live in a place of a monoculture, right? I could go live in India where everybody, comes from a background I do. You could go, there's a reason we're not living in those places, right? There's a reason our ancestors chose to come here.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I'm laughing a little bit because I'm white now. I can tell you that my grandmother did not feel white.
Correct. It took your people some time to become white in the American.
But what I'm laughing about is my Italian American buddies that I live with, they're all pro-Trump. And I'm like looking at them, okay, your grandmother was told that she couldn't get a job anywhere. There were signs that said no Italians need apply. And they told my grandmother to go back to the countries they originally came from. And that was the fight I got into with Donald Trump, because he was saying that to the 4 congresswomen, ironically 3 of which were born here in the United States. So it's this nativism, this racism.
Let's talk about your Italian American friends for a second, because on the one level, I would say, and I recognize that kind of type you're talking about exactly, right? And there's so many versions of it in this country right now. On the one hand, I would hold them responsible for their own views and hold them responsible for a kind of narrowness, right?
It's so misguided, and it so lacks context and an understanding of our history. It's so misguided.
But let me make a second point. I also would hold what I call the pro-democracy movement, because this is not just about Democrats and Republicans, right? This is like, do you believe in democracy at this point, or do you not?
100%.
I would also hold the pro-democracy, pro-inclusion movement that wants that future. I would hold them accountable for failing to organize and win over people like that also, right? Because I imagine, maybe I'm wrong, I imagine your friends you're talking about, these are not clan robes people, right? These are probably decent people who would treat people of color very nicely in their personal life, right? All of that, right? I know exactly who you're talking about. And so what I think has happened there, it's at the heart of the story of the Persuaders, is we have failed to tell those people a better story about how to think of America, right? The right, for all of its narrowness and kind of dystopianness right now, I think is better at message. It's better at narrative. It's better at telling a story about America that is easy to access, that plays into the fears and anxieties people have. And I think what we need to do is to build a pro-democracy movement that is better at persuasion, so that guys exactly like who you're talking about are not only interpersonally kind to people of color who are their neighbors or they work with, but are able to go from that personal interaction and that personal decency they have to supporting a vision of a country that operates like that at scale for everyone.
I mean, I think it's very well said. You're also talking about the condescension of some people. Frankly, on the left, there's a lot of condescension towards the people on the right. And that's why the right tries to own the libs and all this sort of nonsense that goes on. I want to test two things on you. When I got done reading your book, I wrote some notes to myself, and I was like, I just love to ask Anand these questions. Okay. So in the 1930s, Henry Luce went to Moscow and he interviewed Joseph Stalin. And Stalin said that he would wreck the United States. It would take him 10 years. And Luce, of course, was a staunch American, sort of a conservative Republican. He said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you're a tribal nation. You're a polyglot. You are not a melting pot, but you're just a series of tribes. And with the forces of the KGB and all of the disinformation techniques we have here in Russia, we're going to split your tribes and we're going to cause a second civil war and destroy your nation. And so what Stalin got wrong was the love that our grandparents had for the country. Even if they were being discriminated against, it was still way better than where they came from. And then, of course, the advent of the Second World War galvanized the whole country. But what he also got wrong, though, Anand, was they didn't have the social media mechanisms in place to do what they were saying, because the media was controlled by some corporations that were mostly pro-American. Okay, now fast forward to Vladimir Putin. He's got those mechanisms. He can put that pipe of disinformation into the social media sewage system, and he can create havoc inside the country. Okay, so don't react to that yet, because I'm going to another quote, and I want you to synthesize both. So while we have that going on, Lee Kuan Yew, before he died, the founder of Singapore, in one of his last interviews, they said, well, so are you optimistic or pessimistic about America? In his 90s, Mr. Lee said, no, I'm very optimistic about America, because America can draw from the whole world. You can come to America in 5 short years. You are American, Singaporean American, Italian American, Indian American, and a result of which they can have this reservoir of intellectual capital that's never ending. That is not true for Germany, Japan, China, et cetera. You don't have that level of assimilation. And so synthesize these things for me. Is Stalin right? Are we too tribal and our enemies can break us up? Is Lee right, where if we get the immigration policies right, we can continually renew America, version 3.0 and 4.0 America? Who's right?
I think in certain ways, they're both telling an important truth. And what is not resolved is which of those truths is going to dominate the 21st century in America.
So, well, which one, in your opinion, is?
Let me take each one in turn, though, because I lived the Lee Kuan Yew truth personally in a way that I want to share with you, because I think it has really informed my understanding of America in a way that sometimes makes me think about this a little bit differently than a lot of my own allies on the political left. which is, I am, as you know, I'm critical of a whole bunch of things in this country, as are you, and critical of fundamental structures and systems in this country that do not treat certain people well. However, I'm also the son of immigrants who came to this country from India, chose this country, became American. And we had a very interesting experience when I was 7 years old, living in Shaker Heights, Ohio. My parents got kind of bored of, their adrenaline-fueled immigrant adventure. First, it was hard. It was challenging. How do you figure out the video game of a new country? And then they got it. 2 cars, house in the suburbs, 2 kids. It kind of got easy, and they crashed, and they were like, let's do it again. Let's immigrate again, right? Very kind of unusual thing. So they choose to immigrate to France this time when I'm 7. Now, you got to remember, they're now 10 years. My dad's 10 years further into his career. They have more money at this point. They have more stability. They have more wherewithal. And from the first day we arrived in France, and I remember this as a 7-year-old, watching my parents experience France in this way, it was so clear that this will never belong to you. You will never be part of this. You will never become one of us. It wasn't outright discrimination. It wasn't like you can't be here. It wasn't being treated like crap in restaurants, anything like that. It was just like, there is no idea here native to this country of people becoming French. It's not a thing.
Why?
Right? Becoming German is not a thing. Becoming Swedish is not a thing. Becoming Indian is not a thing. Becoming Chinese is not a thing. My friend Eric Liu wrote a great book called The Chinaman's Chance. He observed brilliantly. He says, my family has been in China for all of recorded human history, right? Like 5,000 years, however many thousands of years Eric Liu's family has been in China. For one generation out of those hundreds of generations, his family was not in China. I think his parents moved here, right? Or maybe his grandparents, right? So 1 or 2 generations out of hundreds, they broke the chain of their Chinese citizenship. And Eric made the observation that he could never become a Chinese citizen again, right? I think he was born as an American citizen. There's no way for Eric Liu, who's only been missing from China, his family, for 1 generation, no way he could ever become Chinese. No way his kids could ever become Chinese. And so my sense of America is that this idea of being able to become an American is one of the most radical ideas in the history of the world. It is an idea we have in many ways failed to extend to all the people we were supposed to for all of our history. But it is a powerful idea worth defending, and we are trying to become something. And I think it's easier if you think about it as trying to become a process, a journey. We are trying to become something really fucking cool, for lack of a more technical term.
I'm
right?
all about it, by the way. I love your I mean, we may not agree ideologically on everything, you and me, we may not, okay? But I love the message. So keep going. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
So I think that part is very real. And I wish more of my friends on the political left would say that part, because I think we need to make sure we are coming across to Americans as people who love the country and love the ideals of the country and understand why they're special and cool. And to make clear, as James Baldwin did, that we are criticizing precisely because we love the country. Precisely because...
Oh, exactly. I appreciate that, Eddie. I totally appreciate that.
I think the second part of what you're saying, which is what Stalin attempted to do and Vladimir Putin has done, is to make a gamble that the same phenomenon I just described, a country made of all the world instead of, a nation of people who look like each other's cousins, that this is too hard. That's what Stalin was telling Henry Luce. That's what Vladimir Putin gambled. It's too hard. This is not a workable model, right? And so Lee Kuan Yew is stating an aspirational, admiring notion, but it's aspirational. It's predictive. We're not quite there yet. We haven't tested it out. We're heading to be this kind of majority-minority country, the superpower of color within your and my lifetimes. And it's not tested whether it's tenable, whether it can hold together, whether people's desire to keep the republic will overwhelm their desire kind of not to share what feels with people who feel alien to them. And so what Putin did, and I start the book with this for a reason. I start the book with these two women, this kind of Russian intelligence officer, Thelma and Louise kind of duo, who came to America in June of 2014, did a road trip around a whole bunch of states, picked up research, tried to kind of absorb the political system the way a reporter, or travel writer would, and then went back to Russia and informed this troll farm in St. Petersburg, the Internet Research Agency, which, exactly as you say, didn't just try to make us angrier, specifically inflamed these tribal divisions. And, as someone who has been, adjacent to the political world, like countries have a lot of ways of messing with each other, right? And the US and Russia have like a whole bunch of different arrows in the quiver, right? It's really significant. Like you can take out someone's power grid, you can sabotage some bank, you can do sanctions, you can, right? No lack of options of sabotage in this ongoing adversarial relationship. Think about this for a second. Vladimir Putin, imagine the meetings that were going on 2012, 2013, 2014. Vladimir Putin presumably orders that the big Russian effort to undercut its greatest adversary, the United States, is getting into our social media and altering and inflaming how we talk to each other. Like, think of the brilliance of that, right? Of all the things you could do. He said, they can fix the power grid in Houston, right? Like, what his calculation was that that's something we can't fix. If we go down the road of what I would call contempt and dismissal, right? Which is different from anger and division. I actually think anger and division are fine in politics. Like, politics is about really hard issues. Like, it's going to get real, right? Contempt and dismissal is different from anger and division. Contempt and dismissal is, there's no point bothering with the mooch. There's no point. Someone like him is never going to XYZ. There's no point. There's no point, right? I am angry that the mooch thinks this about taxes, leads me to further engagement, makes me want to vote and argue with you, right? Write an op-ed.
Well, also demonize me, though. Demonize me. Make me into a two-dimensional character.
But when you get to that contempt and dismissal place, of course someone would say that. Those people will always think that. And we're all doing this to each other right now. And I just think it was so interesting. Having participated in this culture myself, I don't know if you feel like you've also, and I think we've all in many ways participated in an increasingly inflammatory, particularly online culture that spills offline, of course. It's interesting to me. Let's just think for a second that we were playing into Vladimir Putin's wet dream of how we should relate to each other as Americans to undermine the goal of that kind of country made of the world that Lee Kuan Yew was talking about.
I think it's a brilliant assessment, and I this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on. There's something else going on in your book, which to me is the book is loaded with emotion. You make the point, which I agree with, you can't force people through condensation, making them feel bad through pedantry, pedantic sermonizing. They're not going to change their point of view. You're sitting there on a righteous high horse, explaining to them how wrong they are. And then you bring up AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who to me, I think is one of the more brilliant politicians of our time. I don't agree with a lot of her policies, but man, what a workhorse, what a charismatic, and what a force of nature. Tell us about the emotion that's out there and blend it in with your observation of AOC.
I'll tell you, she whether she realized it or not, she kind of wrote herself into the book. I started this book right at the beginning of the pandemic, April 2020. And I actually briefly had a TV show at that time on Vice. And she was my first guest, kind enough to be my first guest on that show. And I think either in the run up to the taping or right after the taping, I was texting with her and thanking her for coming on the show. And I mentioned that I was just starting this new book on persuasion. And she said something to me which took me aback. She said, I think of myself as a persuader, as someone who's really, but that's not how the world sees me. The world has come to see me as a kind of strident, ideological warrior. And she's like, I get that, but my self-conception is almost completely the opposite of that. And I'm always attracted in storytelling to those kinds of things where people's, self-conception is at war with how the world sees them. We all have that, but that makes such interesting narrative. And so I set out to write this chapter about her, which has become a third of the book. I mean, it's 100 pages just about her story. And the reason I dwelled on her story so long, and we spent a lot of time talking to each other, is that I think she embodies some of the difficulties and complications and contradictions and new thinking around persuasion in the 21st century. So I think a lot, if you look particularly at the Democratic Party, a lot of the old model of persuasion was just like reach out to the middle by diluting what you stand for, right? So you start with universal healthcare as an aspiration, but then if you're Obama or Clinton, you kind of water it down to do sort of private insurance, this, that, and you sort of feel like that way you'll keep a broad coalition. The problem with this for Democrats is that this often, it often fails to win over those people in the middle that you're reaching for. They don't go with you anyway. And then you leave your base cold and like no one is for you. And this has often happened to Democrats, as you know. So I think AOC represents a very different model of persuasion for the left, which is actually stand for the bold thing. Stand firmly in your feet for the most ambitious version of a thing. Call it the Green New Deal, call it, certain kinds of democracy reform, whatever. Stand far, far ahead of where the consensus is. Provoke the conversation, right? This is what the right is so good at, and that she is also very good at. Hijack the narrative, provoke, make people go wild. You remember, I'm sure a lot of your friends remember when she proposed that 70%, marginal tax on people making $10 million a year or more. Whether it's a good idea or bad idea, every person in this country was talking about it the next day. That's power, right? The right gets that. Most people on the left don't know how to do that. She knows how to do it. Provoke.
Question.
But then she is also good at having taken the bold stance, having anchored yourself in an ambitious vision, in a way that someone like Joe Biden has been less comfortable doing. Then you have to work people into your vision with a kind of open heart in a way that the left often struggles to do. So you don't reach out by standing for nothing. You reach out by standing firmly for something exciting and thrilling, and then meeting people where they are in terms of pulling them into the vision, right? And so to give you a practical example, if I were trying to persuade you on something where we probably have a disagreement on universal healthcare financed through a wealth tax or something like that, right? I think what Democrats would do to try to reach you is just have like a kind of very weak offering and be like, maybe the mooch will come along with that as someone coming out of the business and finance world. I think what I would say to you, I would try to stick to my universal healthcare single payer kind of demand, but I would try to sell you on it based on my understanding of what you care about, what your values are, right? I would say to you, it is an incredible burden on businesses to have businesses have to administer healthcare systems for their employees and for CEOs to be worrying about whether or not they're going to get a plan that their employee's son's leukemia will be taken care of or not. That's actually a burden that would be very nice to lift from businesses. And then my business friends in France and Germany feel very relieved that they don't have to think about. They can actually focus on their business and not like what Aetna plan they're offering their employees and whether they should grant it to people who work 30 hours or 31 hours or 29 hours, right? That would be the kind of argument I'm making, taking a clear stand, but trying to appeal to your moral frame, or saying, Mooch, you're a freedom guy. You like the idea of freedom, right? A lot of your allies in business like that idea of individual freedom. Well, healthcare in this country, the way it functions for a lot of people is like a big Soviet bureaucracy that dictates your life, and it's un-American, right? You are not free if you can't quit your job and pursue a brilliant idea you wrote on a napkin in a coffee shop because your kids are not going to have healthcare if you pursue that idea, right? What I'm doing right now is making arguments to you that are empathetic, I think, to how you see the world, but I'm still standing for something firm, right?
And I'm with you philosophically. So let me just say a couple of things, which I think you'll appreciate, because I'm more of a realist than I am an ideologue. Number one, I'm for a woman's right to choose, even though I'm Roman Catholic and I personally am pro-life. But that's my choice. I'm not imposing that on anybody else. So don't judge me for my choice. I won't judge you for your choice. If you look at the First Amendment, my religious freedom allows me to be pro-life, but it doesn't allow me to push my religion onto you. Okay, so that's my view there, and people can like me or dislike me for that. Number two, I am pro-gay marriage. I was just on Andrew Cuomo's podcast talking about how myself, a Republican, Cliff Asness, you may not know him, Paul Singer, Republicans, Dan Loeb, we all worked with Andrew Cuomo to move Republican state senators over to the right to gay marriage. As the Dick Cheney. Well, I'm a libertarian, so I always tell my conservative friends, so you want a smaller government except in my bedroom. For some reason, you want a larger government in my bedroom. Okay, so it's just antithetical and philosophically absurd. But let me keep going, okay? You're at a point in the society, whether you like it or not, okay? The Reagan days are over. You're in a point in the society right now where we have a wide income gap. We have a wide wealth gap. You wrote about it in your last book, your third book. And it's painful for me because I grew up like that, Anand. I grew up in an aspirational working class family. Those very same working class families are now desperational. So the wealthy in America, whether they like it or not, they have to come up with a package of services, almost like a suite of equal opportunity. I am not for equal outcomes, like some of your socialist friends. I think that would be a disaster for our society. And I think equal outcomes would do things that are, look at Venezuela.
But who in American life is actually advocating for equal outcomes?
I don't know. Bernie Sanders doesn't like rich people. You know, what's her face?
What policy?
What's her face? The professor that beats up on me all the time, Elizabeth Warren. She's not in love with rich people, but she likes to fly around on a private plane, but she's not in love with rich people. She's in love with her own riches.
I think they make a critique of rich people, but I don't think there's a single Bernie Sanders or Warren proposal that would get anywhere close to equal outcomes, right? And look at the evidence of that. Her wealth tax, right? It was 2 cents for 50 million and up, 3 cents on the dollar.
You can't execute that. So what are you going to do?
That's a whole different issue.
My stock is $100. You're going to tax me there. It just dropped to 50. Now what are we doing?
No,
am I getting the money back?
Here's what I'm saying to you. Yep. Here's what I'm saying to you. If they wanted to equalize outcomes, they'd propose like a 90% tax or a 95% tax on wealth over $1 billion. Yeah, if you're proposing a 3 cent tax on wealth over $1 billion, you're not trying to equalize.
I know it's not practical.
That's it. Whether it's practical is a different issue. I'm just saying they're not trying to equalize outcomes. I don't think anybody in American life is trying to equalize outcomes.
Don't cut the top of the ladder, the rungs of the top of the ladder. You're better off lowering the ladder. Create a platform of equal opportunity, a package
I think that was part of the idea that
education, universal income, education.
But then Republicans will say, how do you pay for it, right? And what they were doing with the wealth tax is saying, here's how you pay for it.
Well, I would rather a VAT because the VAT is a consumption-based tax and the rich are spending the money. And also a lot of people are spending green in the economy. There's a black market economy, as you know, just like there is in Europe. And you would pick up an enormous amount of tax revenues through a VAT. My Republican friends hate the VAT because you can turn the dial on it and it can be confiscatory. But you got to do something. You can't just be, you know who's the biggest spender ever? How about Donald Trump? Okay, Mr. Conservative of the Conservative Party racked up $8.4 trillion of debt in 4 years. Okay, so I mean, this is total hypocrisy at this point. So if you want to fix it, you got to be honest about it, but you got to offer the equal opportunity. And that includes healthcare. One last point about healthcare. Ronald Reagan created universal healthcare in 1986. And let me just explain this obscure fact. In 1986, he signed legislation that required every emergency room doctor and nurse to service somebody if they walked through the door. And so you had people with no health care getting treated for sore throats in emergency rooms all over the country. And what did Mitt Romney say? Mitt Romney said, okay, we can't do that. Okay, Ronald Reagan was right to pass that legislation. We already have universal health care. Let's figure out a way to make it economically efficient, and let's figure out a way to distribute the capital fairly through the system so everybody can get a reasonable amount of healthcare. If you want Lux healthcare because you're a gajillionaire, no problem. But we got to give a base level of reasonable healthcare to every citizen. So
Correct.
So
we agree on that.
You don't have to convince a guy like me. What we have to do is we have to give a little on both sides. This is why I love the book. I'm just going to hold it up again. At the front lines of the fight for the hearts and minds of democracy, the main title is Persuaders. But what I love about the book is you're making this wonderful observation that we're so close. If we just dial down some of the rhetoric and some of the emotion, we're so close. And if we give a little on each side, we could make the union more perfect. Did I get that right about the book, or what am I missing?
I think that's right, and I think there's more common ground than we realize. We have been manipulated by Vladimir Putin, Rupert Murdoch, Donald Trump, the incentives of Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and other social media barons' platforms. A lot of these forces and sources have manipulated us in the direction of greater contempt for each other and greater dismissal. How often do you and I hear just around you, people like that will never X. These anti-vaxxers will never get the vaccine. Well, a whole bunch of the anti-vaxxers did eventually get the vaccine. Thank you to the people, the organizers who kept pushing and didn't just quit in the first inning and pushed and found new arguments and went into the Black community, went into the Latin community, went into white communities in rural areas and said, we don't accept that people won't do the vaccine. People will do what's right. They need to be educated. They need to not hear it just from the president or the CDC. They need to hear it from their pastors. And adjustments were made, and a whole bunch of anti-vaxxers became people with shots in their arm.
Thank God.
You heard it with the Trump presidency, right? Like these people voted for him, that they'll never defect. Well, I heard that kind of shrug a lot during those 4 years. And I'm very thankful that a whole bunch of organizers didn't accept that shrug and organized the hell out of that era. And you know what? A bunch of people defected from Trump. A bunch of people who loved him even after the Access Hollywood tape and everything else decided they didn't want to. And that's why you and I have not been living in the Trump presidency, blessedly, for the last couple of years, right? Yeah. The January 6th commission, right? We think everything is baked. Everything's tribal. Well, through evidence, through care, by completely reinventing the congressional hearing narratively so that it's not 45 people giving statements, and it's clean, it's lean, it's efficient. You can understand it. You can tune in. It's appointment viewing. They have moved a lot of people in the direction of understanding the criminality of the Donald Trump enterprise. And so it is easy to be fatalistic about other people in this country. And it's easy to believe that people can't change. And I think there is a hardcore group of, frankly, fascists in this country right now who are not going to change, who really want to
They were there in the 1930s. There was Father Coughlin, Charles Lindbergh.
They've always been here.
You're never going to get those people.
You've seen these photos
but I also want to calm the people down on the left that, they want to cancel it. It's not enough that if you get accused of something, forget about it. It's not a death penalty. It's a professional death penalty. And it's not even innocent until proven guilty. You're not only guilty, but your career is over. Go home and, sell your house, put your house in foreclosure. What kind of nonsense is that?
I want to be clear that I think a lot of what is sometimes called cancel culture is the rise of an accountability culture, where people who have been on the margins of American society for a long time now have a voice. Women have a voice that they didn't have before to say, that's ridiculous behavior in a workplace. And women didn't have an easy way to pile on, right? Right? All of that.
I just interviewed this woman, Jamie Fiore Higgins, about her book, The Bully Market. She was surprised. She couldn't believe that I was willing to do it because Goldman is Mother Goldman. All roads lead back to Goldman, like in the Roman Empire. And Goldman did the wrong thing here. They should have read the book and invited her in and said, okay, how do we fix this? Rather than put their heads in the sand, which their PR strategy and their lawyers did. See, this is
Yeah.
why you're so good at what you do, because you're bringing the stuff out. You're popping the zit. You know, you're like Dr. Pimple Popper, okay? Probably wasn't the best nickname for you, but that's what you are.
Sure.
And you're helping with something like this. And so I'm grateful for you for many different things, our friendship, but also joining me on Open Book. And Anand, let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you so
I
much
love
for
it.
being a part of this with me.
I need a Republican friend in my life.
I'm staying as a Republican because it pisses Trump off that I'm a Republican, okay? And
Yeah.
I'm gonna be out there fighting the good fight for normalcy.
I love it.
He is, without much debate, one of the greatest political athletes of all time. He was able to convince a wide swath of the American public, including some people who might have formerly voted Democrat, that he would be a vessel for their frustrations. That when people came after him, they were going after them. People identified with him. They identified with him in a way that they don't typically identify with politicians.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us is Alex Eisenstadt. Now, Alex and I go back a long ways, okay? I don't know if you remember this, but we go back to the Mitt Romney campaign, which is a 2012 campaign. So that's 2011, my friend. So 14 years. He is a senior political writer at Axios. He's a best-selling author. And the title of the book is Revenge, the inside story of Trump's return to power. It's great to have you on. But before we get into the book, tell us a little bit about Alex Eisenstadt. What are you? Who are you? Where'd you come from? Where were you raised? You know, give me some good bio gossipy stuff about Alex.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Anthony, and congratulations on all your success with the podcast and everything else you do. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, went to a small school in the mainline suburbs of Philadelphia. Joined Politico in late 2008, and I was there for 16 years, covered all kinds of political things, started covering Trump in 2015, and did it all the way through nonstop ever since. Joined Axios in late January of this year, so I'm new there. And I started working on this book in February of 2023, right after Trump kicked off his comeback campaign. And I spent 2 years writing it, and it came out on Tuesday of this week, Tuesday the 18th.
All right, it's incredibly well sourced. Okay, it's because when I read the book, I'm like, okay, he definitely said that, and I read Trump definitely said that because what Trump does is he repeats himself a lot, and so he is saying shit today that he said in 2015 and 2016. As I was on a plane, so I know he said the stuff, and so you don't have to give me your sources, of course. I would never ask you that, but tell us a little bit about your sourcing. People come to you, right? They tell you,
yeah.
It's almost like they want journalists like you to know the hysteria and the mania that's going on. So why is that? Without, of course, giving up any names.
Yeah.
Tell me why that is.
No, so this is an important question, and I'm glad you're asking it. So when I started writing this book, what I found was that I went to a bunch of people who are in Trump world and close to him, people who are very much involved in the campaign, members of Congress, donors, advisors, allies, the like. I went to a wide spectrum of people, and I told them I was writing this book. I wanted to embark on this project of covering this campaign, and I wanted them to essentially use me as their journal, where I would talk to them daily, where they would tell me what was going on, their impressions, what they saw day to day. And what I found was that people were very willing to talk. They were very open about talking. And I think everyone knew that this was going to be an interesting race. I don't think anyone knew exactly what the twists and turns would be, but I think everyone knew it was going to be very dramatic. And what I found was that people wanted to tell their story about what happened. And I think people knew that history would be made, and they saw this as something that they wanted to be involved in, and they wanted to participate in helping out a journalistic project. And I told them, look, I'm trying to be fair. I'm not trying to write a pro-Trump book or an anti-Trump book. I'm just trying to tell the story behind the scenes of what happened and let readers feel like they're a fly on the wall and they're there in the room as these historical events are happening.
Well, okay. Well, you did an amazing job of that, but I had a couple of reactions to this book. So
Sure.
one of the reactions is that the conventional wisdom is often, if not always, but often wrong about Trump. I would say 90% of the time
Yeah.
it's wrong. So J621, Trump is dead. McCarthy thought
Right.
that. McConnell thought that. Pundits thought that. Okay, he's done. He's a insurrectionist traitor to the United States. Trump doesn't think he's done. Trump's raising hundreds of millions of dollars off of the quote unquote election lie. So tell us about the mindset of the people around Donald Trump. Did they think he was dead in 2021? I mean, again, politically dead, because I want to be very specific here. God forbid. And then the question is, how did his resurrection evolve? Tell us about his confidence level over the last couple of years. Where was it at different points?
I think that one cannot overstate the degree to which Trump was left for dead after January 6th, and including some people who are very close to him. So let's go back to January of 2021. Trump comes back to Mar-a-Lago. He has no political operation to speak of. He is suspicious of the people who work for him. He suspects that they stole money from him. Now, to be clear, Trump is always suspecting that people are stealing money from him and taking advantage of him. But he decides to get rid of his political operation, or at least what is left of it. You go back to this time, and a lot of his old New York friends, the people who came up with him in business, they've decided to leave him. He isn't getting his calls returned anymore. People don't want to have it. He's disregarded in a lot of respects until he calls up Susie Wiles and says, I want you to figure out what's going on in my political operation. I want you to help me. And they didn't even have at Mar-a-Lago at that time. Trump didn't even have his private Wi-Fi at that point. He had nothing. So Susie Wiles drives to and from her home in Jacksonville to brief Trump, and she builds a political operation from scratch, in part because he didn't have anything, in part because a lot of people who worked for him left him for dead. And then in terms of his overall mindset, Trump has very much sharply divided the American public. There are people who love him and there are people who hate him. I don't think there's a whole lot in between there. And what one can conclude from this race, and this is one of the overall conclusions from this book, is that he is, without much debate, one of the greatest political athletes of all time. He was able to convince a wide swath of the American public, including some people who might have formerly voted Democrat, that he would be a vessel for their frustrations, that when people came after him, they were going after them. And people identified with him, and they identified with him in a way that they don't typically identify with politicians. One important point to make after January 6th is he, thanks to his marketing power, was able to almost turn that into a plus for himself, in that he was able to convince people that it was simply the result of the Justice Department coming after him. And if you look at that, he's still pushing that message. When he goes to the DOJ and he launches this purge of the DOJ and the FBI, getting rid of anyone who was involved in any tangential way to the investigation related to January 6th. He has completely rewritten the narrative to cast himself as a victim. And to some extent, it's worked.
So when do things start to get better for him? He's on trial, and they're going to convict him of being a felon. He's got 34 felony counts. Is that a low for him? Is that weirdly contrarian, galvanizing support for him? Tell us when things really started to seismically change.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, this guy's mounting a very big political comeback.
So here's a really important point in the book. Let's go back to very, very early 2023, right? In late 2022, the Republican Party has a very disappointing midterm election. Trump gets a lot of blame for that, right? Because of the candidates that he endorsed, many of whom went on to lose in the general election, right? A couple weeks after that, you have this famous or infamous dinner that Trump has with the rapper Ye and Nick Fuentes, both of whom are avowed anti-Semites, right? In Fuentes' case, a Holocaust denier. You have a couple weeks after that, Trump puts out a Truth Social, essentially calling for the abolishment of the Constitution. You have a couple weeks after that, Trump decides to put out NFT baseball cards of himself, right? And even within Trump's inner circle at that point, there was a widespread belief that Trump might be heading off the rails, that he questions about how serious he really was about this comeback campaign, and that maybe it's over before it started. You go back you then fast forward a few weeks later, and there is a train derailment in Ohio, and Trump decides to go down there. He goes down there with JD Vance, who helps to organize that trip. He goes to a McDonald's, does some photo ops, and all of a sudden you have the narrative set for this campaign. You talk to everyone and they'll tell you that visit to East Palestine, Ohio was a turning point in this campaign because it gave Trump the message that he was looking for, which is that he could identify with blue collar people who feel like the federal government hasn't done enough for them. And if you look at what those people were saying on that trip, they were telling him that the federal government and the Biden administration wasn't doing enough to help them following this train derailment. And if you look at that visit, his visit to McDonald's, that was something, those retail stops, that person-to-person retail, that he really hadn't done at all before in his political career, right? Like, this guy is a germaphobe. And the fact that he would show up at McDonald's, that he would talk to potential supporters, that became something he did throughout the campaign up until the very end, where he literally did a photo op where he literally was working at a McDonald's. So that East Palestine visit was a huge turning point for him.
Yeah, I guess, and that probably also was a precursor to Vance becoming the vice president and so forth. But
Sure.
I guess where I'm trying to be as objective as possible, because I've had my ups and downs with Donald Trump, and obviously I think he's a danger to our society. I've been pretty open to that, but there's something going on in the society right now, and I'm going to say it. I want you to react to it. I
Sure.
think he's the greatest culture warrior of our time. I think there is a culture war going on in the country: pronoun usage, woke, DEI. The buckle of the Bible Belt doesn't like non-traditional America in their minds. And I think Donald Trump has assaulted the people. He's triggered the liberals, and he's got them with their hair on fire on most cable channels.
Yep.
And the right is dominating the media now. Take a look. They say the left is the left-wing media, the left is dominating, but the right really has a stronghold on ratings, whether it's Joe Rogan, radio, podcasting, Fox News. And so respond to that. Is he a formidable culture warrior? And is culture going to be a 26 issue for the midterms and another 28 issue? And what does that say about the Democrats? What are they missing here? First of all, am I right? Yes or no? And
on the culture war thing,
what does it say about the Democrats?
Oh, I think without question, you're right about the culture war. He has found cultural issues that deeply split the American society, and that in many cases are winning political issues, right? They made the Trump campaign took the trans issue and made it a centerpiece of their effort. Go back and look at the ads they ran on transgender issues. You talk to people who are involved in the Trump campaign, and they will tell you that was a turning point, that running trans ads helped them, not just with their base, though certainly it did, but it helped them peel off Black voters, other minority voters, suburban women in some cases, people who traditionally vote Democratic. And so, yes, I think Trump is absolutely a culture warrior. I don't see that stopping. I think that he has found ways to trigger the left, take positions that are not necessarily palatable to the American public from an electoral perspective. And I think he has united conservatives and his supporters behind him, and in some cases, people who weren't necessarily traditional Republican voters. And forgive me, what was the next question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. But the Democrats, I don't think understand this. I think they've decided they've taken his bait. They've enraged themselves. They've started an internecine fight with each other, and they want to double and triple down on nonsense as opposed to get back to white middle class and lower middle income voters, which was their bread and butter for a century.
Yeah, I think that is something the Democratic Party is very much struggling with right now, and it's hard for them when they don't even have a leader of their party who's determining what their message is. And I'll just say a couple of things about the podcast issue, because it seems to me like podcasts and YouTube and streaming is very much becoming the dominant way of communicating with people. And you know this as a guy who has, you have a couple of very popular podcasts right now. I've seen you on the Spotify top charts. And so the power of communicating with people through podcasts, through non-traditional ways, in addition to the work that you do on more traditional cable news. And so, you've experienced this personally, I think. But if you look at the top Spotify charts, it's almost entirely dominated by conservatives at this point.
Well, listen, I agree. I mean, I think that that's the weird thing about it. Trump tells you that the left wing media is controlling things. The other great irony is on migration. If people come across the border, Elon Musk and Donald Trump say, well, they're going to turn the nation blue, but actually those people are traditional Catholics generally,
right?
And they slant towards conservatism. So there's a big irony there. What would turn the country blue, Alex Eisenstadt? Having Canada be the 51st state. That would turn the country blue. I mean, they're all liberals up there. I know what Trump's doing,
Yeah. Here's the interesting thing, though, about the podcast issue, which is that, it's not just the Charlie Kirks of the world who are out there who are sort of traditionally aligned with, they're sort of the classic MAGA supporter, right? You also, if you look at the top of the charts, it's also people like Rogan. And those are people who probably are skewing more pro-Trump at this point, but they are appealing to a less traditional MAGA voter. So a lot of men who feel like they are disregarded by society, who are struggling economically, who are maybe struggling emotionally in some cases. And those people have really come to identify with Trump. And Trump did very well among male voters, including male voters who might not typically vote in elections. I mean, look at where Trump spent time. It wasn't just on Rogan. It was on places like Theo Vaughn, another very popular podcaster. He was hanging out. Trump was literally hanging out at frat houses.
He did well on those podcasts. He did well on Theo Vaughn's podcast. My kids objectively give him a high grade on that. I guess before I let you go, I want to talk about the shadow effort, which you write about in the book. The GOP is trying to stop Trump. What's the most surprising thing that you learned there? And what do you think of the party formerly known as the GOP? The party's now the MAGA Republicans. It's Trump decapitated that party, hostile takeover. He owns the party that is now named the Republicans, but it's really the Trumplicans. Talk about the old party of McCain and Romney and Bush and their attempt to try to stop him. And tell me a little bit about them and tell me a little bit about where you think they're going.
You look at what happened in this past election in terms of their efforts to stop Trump, and it felt very much like their efforts in 2015, 2016. And you'll remember that you had donors like Paul Singer and other actually people aligned with the old Romney machine and Mitt Romney himself, who during the 2015, early 2016 part of the Republican Party primary spent millions of dollars in this last-ditch effort to stop Trump from winning the nomination. And it completely failed. It blew up. And it felt like a lot of the same stuff happened in 2023, right? Where Ron DeSantis has this successful 2022 midterm win, and all of a sudden he is seen as the vessel of the Republican establishment. He's the guy who can finally take out Donald Trump. And so Fox News gets behind DeSantis. The Murdoch machine gets behind DeSantis. And this is actually a sub theme in the book, which is that for all people talk about Fox News loving Donald Trump, it's actually a marriage of convenience that Murdoch and a lot of the people associated with Fox actually never really liked Trump that much. They saw him as a means of making money and as being good for business. But anyways, they got behind DeSantis. You had other major Republican donors getting behind DeSantis. George W. Bush, of course, no big Trump fan. After DeSantis wins re-election, ends up calling up DeSantis to congratulate him. You had this Republican establishment that was firmly behind Ron DeSantis. And then immediately as DeSantis pokes his head out, begins to engage nationally, things don't turn out well for him. It immediately becomes apparent that he's not ready for the national stage and he's not ready for prime time. Trump at this point is becoming ascendant. He is regaining traction. And once again, this effort to stop Trump just folds. It just kind of collapses upon itself, right? Trump ends up racking up endorsements. DeSantis starts to fade, and it's over.
Yeah, it is objectively the greatest political comeback, I think, in the modern era, if not U.S. history. So we have 5 words that we picked out of your book, and I want you to respond to these, and you can give me a sentence or two, sort of a Ross shot test at the end of our podcast. I say the word Republican. You say what?
It's a party that is now dominated by Donald Trump.
Yes, it's a populist party now. This is a different party than the one that we grew up with. Okay. I say the word Democrat. You say what?
It's a party that is in opposition to Donald Trump, but is very much struggling to find its way right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, I'm paraphrasing. I think Will Rogers once said, I belong to 6 disorganized parties. I'm a Democrat or something like that, right? Okay. So revenge. Title of your book. Say the word revenge. You think of what?
Trump's motivation above all else to get back at the people who he believes are stopping him or have tried to stop him or who were in his way at any time.
Yeah. Also, he needed to avoid jail. He had a pretty big indictment coming on the January 6th stuff. It's interesting. Merrick Garland didn't go after him. It's interesting. But anyway, all right. 2029, 100 years after the stock market crashed, is Donald Trump going to be president on January 20th, 2029?
I don't believe he will be. I think he loves, and we go back to this. This is part of our conversation earlier. He sees it as a means of triggering the left. And when he talks about running for president again in 2028, he sees that as a way of triggering the left and getting the left to talk about things that are not electorally, that are focusing on issues that do not help them electorally. So when he talks about that, he knows it triggers them.
He declares martial law at some point and cancels the election? He Viktor Orbán's the U.S.?
Look, I mean, it's hard for me to predict that. I'll leave that to others to predict.
I'm just throwing it out there so it doesn't. The more you talk about it potentially happening, it'll maybe gird people to make sure it doesn't.
Right.
All right. So 2029, we have a different president.
Okay.
Is that you say that it's January 20th?
I mean, that would be my assumption.
That would be your guess. Okay, I'm going to go with that as well. Okay, I say the word Trump. I say the word Trump.
Sure.
You say what?
Someone who still has widespread power, widespread influence. Consider this for a second. You're someone who's been involved in fundraising for the Republican Party. You've raised a ton of money over the years, right?
30 years. Been involved for 30 years. Yep.
Right. So Trump has in his political operation right now $500 million. We and others have now reported that Elon Musk is prepared to donate another $100 million. In other words, let's just say for the sake of this conversation, Trump has $600 million in his war chest. That is an astonishing amount of money. That is more money potentially than the rest of the Republican Party will raise over the course of this cycle, potentially.
Yeah,
he is going to be able to shape the midterms for years to come. He's going to be able to shape the midterms, and he's potentially going to be able to shape politics for years to come. Not just because of his stature, but because of the money he has.
No question. You are 100% right. Well, my last question, then I'm going to let you go. Is he going to change the name of Washington, D.C. to Trump, D.C.?
Here would be my prediction. I think
the president is George Washington. He told us that in the State of the Union. So is he going to do that?
Okay, so here I'm going to give you a prediction. Okay, I think he might float it at one point to once again trigger the left. I don't think he'll actually do it.
Okay, you don't think he's going to be able to do it. All right, but he. Let me say.
You?
I think you and I. Well, I think you and I are I think unanimously, you and I would say he would want to do that. If I said to him tonight, I say, Mr. President, we're going to change Washington, D.C. to Trump, D.C. And all we got to do is press a button and everything will change. He would do that, or he'd say, no, I'm a traditionalist. Let's leave it in George Washington's name. What would he say?
I think the former, and he would float it out potentially on Truth Social to make people on the left to make their heads explode. Okay. Would he actually do it? I'm skeptical.
He would do it. He would do it if he could do it. Come on, Alex. You've been around this thing a long time.
He would do it if he could do it. I agree.
He would do it if he could do it.
He would do it if he could do it.
The title of the book is Revenge, the Inside Story of Trump's Return to Power. It's an amazing book. It's incredibly well-researched, well-sourced. And if you really want to know what happened over the last 18 months in Trump world, read Alex Eisenstadt's book, Revenge. Thank you so much for joining us.